Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sabrina Kofer, and on behalf of Choice and ACRL, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, How Academic Librarians Are Working with Faculty to Source Affordable Textbooks for Students, which is sponsored by Taylor and Francis. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from Choice and ACRL that addresses new ideas and developments of interest to the academic library community. Before we get started, I'd like to point out just a few features of the webinar software. All of the attendees who join the presentation are automatically muted and your cameras are off. So no need to worry about generating any noise or feedback. We've got that taken care of for you. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. We are using the Q&A feature today. Please use it to ask questions of our presenters. We do expect many questions and we likely won't have time to get to them all, so we apologize in advance for that. But that being said, we'll answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation. So please do type your questions into the Q&A module as they occur to you. You can also use the upvote feature to highlight questions that you like. Also note that there is closed captioning available for today's session. To toggle the automated captions on or off, please use the CC button on the bottom right corner of your screen. Last, please note that we are recording today's program and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archive version. So in this 90-minute session, our speakers will present a new group of case studies that address how academic librarians are collaborating with faculty on affordable textbook alternatives. After the presentations, we will hold a Q&A session with questions from you all, the attendees. And to access the case studies, you can find them, I'll send a link in the chat where if you'd like to download or read them. Our speakers today are Lily Duboc, textbook affordability librarian at the University of Central Florida, John Rabel, senior instructional designer, also at the University of Central Florida, Hallie Clausen, reference instruction and outreach librarian and affordable learning solutions coordinator at CSU Dominguez Hills, Laura Hinman, library director at Midland University, and Angie Strait, collection and resource management librarian at Marshall University. And with that, we are ready to get started. So I will hand it over to our first presenters today, Lily and John.
Hello, everyone. I am Lily Duboc, the textbook affordability librarian at the University of Central Florida, and I'm joined here today by my colleague, Dr. John Rabel, senior instructional designer. And I also just want to point out that textbook affordability at our university is made possible by so much collaboration. And today we're going to highlight two cases, one of an OER and one of a library-sourced ebook. And I just wanted to mention many of the names who are involved in those projects. And some of those names, I think they're attendees here today. So hello, glad you could watch today. Quick background on UCF. It is based in Orlando, Florida, and is one of the largest universities in the nation. We have over 70,000 students enrolled. It's also a high percentage of transfer students, high percentage of minority students. It's designated as a Hispanic serving institution. And so there are a lot of populations of students who really truly benefit from textbook affordability, more affordable or free options for their course materials. And as textbook affordability kind of started trending a number of years ago, our efforts started around 2016. With a small but mighty group of librarians, instructional designers, and faculty. And what we started to do, we investigated what was already being done at the university. So we had a list of classes that said there were no required materials. So we investigated, well, what are those faculty using? Are they using OER? Are they developing their own materials? And then we started to think about what else could we do to support this initiative? Are there faculty who would want to work with us? And spoiler alert, there were. And shortly, John will talk about our first OER. But I'll speed ahead to today. At the University of Central Florida, we have what's called the Affordable Instructional Materials Initiative. And this is recognized under the Office of the Provost. As you can see, there are 4 pillars that are part of this. One is open educational resources, and our OER programming, our OER initiatives, is a collaboration between instructional designers and the library, where the instructional designers manage the press books, as well as help faculty adapt and author OER. And the library, the part that I lead and work with subject librarians and acquisitions and cataloging librarians, we help locate the materials for OER in this part of our Affordable Instructional Materials Initiative. Then, of course, there's the library source materials component. And I lead this along with subject librarians and others from the library. And with this, we're talking mainly about unlimited user ebooks. Those are used as one-to-one replacements of traditional textbooks. Faculty can also find alternative ebooks they can use for their students to access the required course materials. And then our other component of this would be the physical course materials that are on course reserves. You can see there are two other pillars that are not run by the library instructional designers. That is affordability counts. If you're familiar with this, you might be from Florida because it is a Florida-run initiative that gives faculty recognition if they use affordable or free materials. And the benchmark for this is $20 or less per credit hour. So if it is a typical 3 credit hour course, they're considered affordable if their materials are $60 or less in total. Then they can get an affordability counts badge for recognition. And then the final pillar is First Day. This is the bookstore's inclusive access program. UCF is actually an opt-in institution, so students have to choose to be part of this discount program. They aren't automatically enrolled in it like many other institutions. And now I'll turn it over to John to talk about one of our first OER projects.
Thanks, Lily. As Lily mentioned, I'm John Rabel. I'm a senior instructional designer in our Center for Distributed Learning. So we help faculty develop and deliver blended and online courses. So as kind of the literature says, instructional designers and librarians have been working together and utilizing a lot of our strengths on campus, and we've been doing that since 2016. Lily mentioned that a faculty member, our small and mighty group worked with faculty at the onset. It was really faculty driven. And a faculty member came to us from the English department and said, hey, I use an anthology. Is there a way to kind of bust that open and use individual works and customize the work? So the small and mighty group, first of all, it's not our job. It wasn't our job. Nobody told us to do this. So this was all kind of grassroots from both our perspective and the faculty perspective. So we took a look at it. It's like, okay, what can we do? Because at the time, our bookstore contract was pretty ironclad with, we can work in the OER space. We can work in the free space. So if it's something that the library offered for free to students or anything OER that had no cost, then we could work in this space. So we took a look at it and, first kind of looked at, okay, what readings are required, and then looking at finding those works. So a lot of them exist in HathiTrust. There are some works that are much more harder to find, rarer to find, that are somewhat hosted on university websites or other repositories. So we ran into copyright. So we had to first find it, and then we needed to evaluate, did we need permission? Is this something that's already in the public domain, or is this a translation that is already copyrighted? Or we had to determine who owned it. And then there was one instance where a work, we couldn't find an acceptable translation. The faculty member was driving what was acceptable or not. We would find stuff and present it to the faculty member. And then it turns out the faculty member ended up translating a work himself. So if you can't find it, then do it yourself. Next, please. So looking at all of this copyright stuff, we really had to keep detailed records on what was where and license and rights, because nobody at the institution had really done this before. And we weren't sure with our collective bargaining agreement, does this work belong to the faculty member or to the institution? So we really had to keep very detailed records of the title, the author, is this a translator or editor, the dates, and the type of rights. So if you're going to do this in the future, start off with very, very detailed record. Next, please. So a lot of people like anthologies because they're uniform. You've got line numbers, you've got stanza breaks, you've got footnotes, you've got a very uniform and presented to the student. So we really had to think of, we're pulling in information from a lot of different places, a lot of different file formats. Some are EPUBs, HTML, PDFs, Word documents. So we really wanted to focus on the readability. Formatting, especially in this discipline, was very, very important. So we had to come up with solutions to take into account all of the various types of formatting, and then also access from the student perspective. We didn't, at the time, when we did this, we didn't really want to lock into a file format. Like, we didn't want this to be available only on like a Kindle, for example, with the Mobi format. So we wanted to make sure that we were platform and device agnostic. Next, please. So what we did was we reformatted, we being me, reformatted everything into HTML, because that's where we had the control using CSS and creating not only a uniform experience, but also an accessible experience. And then once we had the HTML could be moved into an EPUB container format. And then we also, from the HTML, created PDFs. So we allowed students to choose what file formats and how they wanted to really read and interact with the content. This was, of course, before we had access to Pressbooks. So everything was very document driven. And then what was great is that all of this content was now easily being able to be ingested into Pressbooks with only minor revisions. Next. So from the first time that that the faculty member used this OER in the course, this is some of the feedback. I'm not going to read word for word, but basically this is everything that the research has been showing from the student perspective over the last 5 to 7 years. Appreciation for the free content, for the digital content. And I think I just wanted to highlight, in my other classes, I was unable to purchase every book required, which led to a lot of extra stress and ultimate failure. So that's kind of the reason behind both the faculty members' drive and our drive to really provide the content that the student needs without cost. Next, please. And back to Lily.
Thank you, John. So we do work with OER at UCF, like John showed, one of our first projects, and I'll kind of jump ahead. And we also, of course, work with a lot of library ebooks. We have hundreds that faculty use instead of traditional textbooks that are purchased. And we do calculate the savings. And so those are calculated by the cost of what it would cost to purchase that textbook times the number of students in the courses. So our estimate of potential student savings for library ebooks is about $4 million as of this past June. And we had the opportunity to take a deep dive into one of these courses and really try to determine, how does it impact student success metrics? What are the students saying about it? And this was with Amanda Walden's medical terminology course. And she decided to adopt a library ebook because of being closely tied to the library and working directly with her subject librarian, Rich Gauze. Amanda decided that, medical terminology doesn't change that much. At least it doesn't change so quickly to warrant all these new editions of textbooks that come out every year or two. So she decided it would be easy enough to adopt a stable library ebook and then just add content as she needed it as the years progressed, as things changed. So the library purchased an unlimited user ebook. It's not DRM free. So there are still digital rights management restrictions placed upon it. However, it was very important to choose an unlimited user ebook because of the large number of students per semester that are in this medical terminology course. About 3,000 students per year take this course. And so you can just imagine the huge number of potential savings. The book itself, if the students were to purchase it, would be about $100 per book. So our estimate of potential savings would be around $300,000 in savings per year for this course alone. We were able to survey the students last fall, and we compared student success metrics with the before adopting the library sourced ebook and after, and there was no negative impacts. The grades stayed high, GPA stayed high, everything was good, and students talked a lot about the benefits. They talked similar benefits to OER. They talked about how it was accessible and portable. They really liked the digital version of having a textbook. There was one veteran student who talked about how difficult it is to carry around a physical book and really appreciated an ebook version. Students appreciated all the bells and whistles, like changing the font, zooming in, using it on different devices. We did note that students had a few problems with it. So some did have trouble finding those features, not sure how to zoom in, or they didn't like how if they downloaded the whole book at once, that it would expire after 21 days and they would have to check it out again digitally. So we were able to see those problems and address them quickly. To address how they could find features, we created an instructional video to send out to students mid-semester that's now available for them to access. And we were actually able to find a way to change the book's expiration period. So now it no longer expires after 21 days. Now it can last the whole semester. Another thing we do so that students are aware that their textbook is available for free through the library is that we work with the bookstore. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you kind of see what it looks like to students when they search for a textbook to purchase. You see that there's a note that says, please note, the ebook is available for free through the UCF library. And you see that it tells students to wait for class. Don't purchase it yet because it is available for free. But of course, this does give them the option to purchase it if they want to. Another thing we're working on is an e-textbook portal, and estimating to launch this in fall, where we're adding the hundreds of ebooks that are used for classes at UCF. It'll be searchable by course number, book title, course department, and instructor, very similar to the bookstore's search. So it'll be really evident to students how they can find their materials. Now, transfer it back over to John.
Sure. So thanks, Lily. Kind of talking about our success and setbacks over the years. Lily mentioned kind of that initial group. I was part of that initial group. And, you know, we had some success with updating the bookstore contract. We've got textbook affordability and OER recognized inside the contract. We brought institutional awareness to our senior administration. Lily's position was created through funding through the provost. Myself and a few others were able to get OER grant funds from a state program for our general education program. And we offered for the first time professional development strictly on OER, paid professional development. That was a key kind of indicator, but we've had some setbacks, of course, at our institution. We've had quite a bit of turnover in various leadership positions and also within our departments, even before the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw kind of with the pillar, there's more of an emphasis on affordable rather than open. That's kind of that that at least from my perspective, and also kind of, I like to see more open, and also partnering with the library to create the open material and host the open material. And then we've seen just like across the country, the rise of these inclusive access / first day programs at our institution, where we're currently opt-in, but there is a continued emphasis from various parties to switch us to an opt-out. Recently, our Student Government Association passed a resolution to remain opt-in. So hopefully we're still opt-in for now, but next. So that's why the future is next, kind of uncertain. Next. It's uncertain yet hopeful. So, we had the opportunity through the legislature, they passed a program that would provide grant funding, very similar to like an Affordable Georgia program throughout the state, but our governor vetoed the funding for it. We have the small but mighty personnel at the institution, but for an institution of our size, it's never enough. And then also uncertainty over the future of the inclusive access for state programs. But we are hopeful because there is kind of a refocusing with new administration to being very strategic, and we're trying to pitch our programs under student success. And there are new kind of strategic innovation funds for that. We didn't get accepted this year, but maybe we can have some proposals accepted next year. As we've seen over the years, a little can do a lot. And that's why we're still kind of hopeful, and like I said earlier about the student government resolution. Next. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you everyone very much for coming, and we'll be happy to answer questions towards the end.
Okay, so I think I am next. I'll go ahead and jump in there. My name is Hallie Clausen. I'm a librarian at CSU Dominguez Hills, so California State University, Dominguez Hills. I'm also the ALS coordinator here at our campus. And a little bit about Dominguez Hills. So we are in Carson, California, which is just south of Los Angeles, just north of Long Beach. We are a primarily commuter campus. We have just under about 18,000 students, and it's primarily undergrads. We have about just under 2,000 graduate students. But we are a bit atypical in terms of our demographics, I think, compared to many campuses across the country. About over half of our students identify as first generation, and that is high even among the CSUs. Our average age is a bit older at 25. And we are similarly a Hispanic serving institution. 65% of our students identify as Hispanic, 10.6% Black, 7.5% Asian, and only 6.4% white. So if you look at our demographics in total, just under half of our first year students qualify under multiple of these categories. So they are first generation and coming from a minority background, and qualify for Pell Grants and other financial aid funding. So we have lots of students who are not in a position where they are particularly comfortable with college. They don't have necessarily as much financial help or familial help. So this is basically where the Affordable Learning Solutions program comes in, is we know that we have all these students who need support, and so we are trying to provide that for them. So Affordable Learning Solutions is an initiative across all of the CSUs. So it's not just here at Dominguez Hills. We have it at all the CSUs, or at least most of the CSUs. Here at Dominguez Hills, we do run it out of the library, but there is a lot of freedom for different campuses to sort of make the program their own. Obviously, we do this because textbooks are just too expensive. I think we all know the average of over $1,200 a year that students are expected to spend on textbooks, which is just too much. Dominguez Hills was one of the flagship campuses, though. So we started the program in about 2009, 2010, and really were able to help make ALS what it has turned into. We primarily focus on helping faculty choose affordable but also high quality educational content for their students. This year on our campus, we had about 300 faculty participating. We saved students, we estimate about $1.2 million. And I personally think that that is low. In previous years, it's been as high as 5 or 8 million just on our campus. And I'll talk a bit later about why I think that number is so low. But the savings across the entire CSU system are very significant. So since we've started tracking the data in about 2010, in case you can't see the details on this graph, the black bars indicate bookstore savings. So that is things like rental textbooks, used textbooks, immediate access programs, that kind of a thing. And then in 2013, they started counting the campus activities, and that is things like OER adoptions, choosing older editions of a textbook in order to try and save students money. And in 2020 to 2021, the savings across the entire CSU were over $75 million. I think the goal is to get to 150 million by 2025. And my understanding is that we are more or less on track for that to happen. So here at Dominguez Hills, we do a lot of different things in order to try and support affordable learning. Within the library, a lot of it falls under the heading of course reserves. So we do a lot of e-reserves integration. We use the program Leganto to integrate textbook chapters as well as individual articles, that kind of a thing, into used to be Blackboard and now it's going to be Canvas. We also have many library-owned materials. We have over 1,600 e-textbooks. In this most previous year, we had, I believe, 94 textbooks available in our physical print course reserves. We also do take a lot of print books from faculty. So when they have an instructor copy or if they have extra copies that they would lend out to students, they will actually lend them to the library, and then students can use those here in our course reserves. And then we also have our Toro textbook library. So we are very fortunate that our bookstore have been really supportive of affordable learning. They like to partner with us. They've been very supportive of our efforts. So the Toro Textbook Library is a program where our course reserve specialist evaluates different classes that have high enrollment, particularly expensive textbooks, particularly high use textbooks. And then we actually will rent copies of those books from the library and then provide them in course reserves. And that has seen less use in the past couple of years, obviously with the pandemic, but we're hoping that now that we are fully back on campus, that usage will continue to go back to where it used to be. And then of course, there are other resources through the university bookstore. So again, things like immediate access. We call it DH Immediate Access, but our bookstore is a Follett bookstore. So it's the same as Follett Immediate Access. And obviously the bookstore, like I said, does other things like rental textbooks, custom course packs, things like that. So as far as what I do in terms of common faculty questions, the California state does mandate that we mark what are called zero cost course materials. So ZCCM courses have to be marked in our course catalog so that when students are signing up for a class, they can see that little marker that says that this class either will cost nothing if it is ZCCM in terms of textbooks, or if it is low cost course materials, LCCM, then it costs under $40. So students know that right off the bat. So I frequently will help faculty navigate, does their course count, and make sure that that is marked appropriately. I also help a lot with copyright questions. You know, can I use this particular article? Does it count as open access? Does it count as fair use? So helping consult with faculty in those kinds of questions. and then helping ensure access to the various print and digital materials that we own and making sure that students have access to that. Obviously, we try to get as many unlimited access ebooks as we can, but that is sometimes more or less available depending on the publishers and other restrictions. I'll talk about that a bit more later. The other thing that I do is consulting with faculty about OER. We have a lot of faculty that already use OpenStax textbooks or things that they can find from Merlot, LibreTexts, other OER repositories, but just making sure that they can find materials that are high quality, that they will continue to have access to. And I'm starting to work with some faculty to create OER for particular higher discipline or higher division classes where the OER doesn't already exist. So challenges. One thing that I want to talk about is the fact that our program, like I say, started in 2009. The person who was in charge of ALS at that time, our head of reference at the time, basically was able to make the program what she wanted it to be. But then, of course, she ran it for a long time and then she retired. And so she had all of these relationships that she had built with faculty in trying to get them access to all of these materials. But once she retired, there was a bit of a gap. The various different pieces of ALS were split across the library. Other people came in. And I personally only started last November. So the biggest part of trying to get a handle on ALS for me has just been building these relationships and trying to learn who is already using things like OER and making sure that our reporting is accurate. So I mentioned learning where the OER and ALS activity already exists. I estimate that, or I believe that that $1.2 million savings is very low. I think it's higher than that, but we just don't know in all cases when somebody might be using an OpenStax textbook and they just haven't told us. And then the other challenge that I wanted to highlight is really keeping up with the e-textbook landscape. So as I said, we are not always able to get unlimited ebook access. Sometimes all we can get is a 1-user license or a 3-user license. Sometimes we can't even get that for some of the newer editions of certain textbooks. Just not everything is available digitally. And especially during the pandemic, both faculty and students really got used to using ebooks and now start to expect ebooks. And it's really difficult sometimes to have to tell them, well, we can't get that book for you, unfortunately. You know, the publisher doesn't provide it for us, or they provide it, but it's extremely expensive. You know, we really can't be spending $2,000 on a single user license for a particular textbook. So having to explain that to faculty and students can be really difficult. And I think we're going to hold questions to the end. So I will leave it at that and pass it on to the next person.
Okay, hi everyone. Hopefully everybody can hear me. My name is Laura Hinman. I'm the library director at Midland University in Fremont, Nebraska. This first slide is just kind of a breakdown of what Midland University looks like, our demographics. So we are a fairly small school. Our enrollment this year was around 1,600 undergraduate students. And that includes our non-traditional and transfer students. And then we also have a campus in Omaha that houses our grad programs, and that's mainly our MBAs and our MEDs, and then some grad certifications as well. We're a very diverse campus as well. A lot of our students came from 39 states and 11 countries. We are a 4-year private, primarily traditional undergraduate school, and we are affiliated with the ELCA. And a majority of our students are either involved in the athletics or the performing arts. I believe we have, I think it's 36 varsity sports on campus. So we do have a lot of athletes here. And we are also a one-to-one initiative Apple Distinguished School. So all of our students get iPads when they first come here. And then just quick, the history on Midland. We originally were called Midland College, and we started in Atchison, Kansas in the late 1800s, which moved to Fremont in 1919. We merged with Luther College in Wahoo, which then turned into Midland Lutheran College, and now we have been rebranded and renamed to Midland University in 2010. So really quick about our library on campus. Again, our library is called Luther Library. Staff, there is one librarian, which is me. I'm the library director, and it is just me in there. We also have our help desk and our academic resource center, which would be the writing lab, learning lab, and all of that, and then IT staff. Typical collection, we don't have a huge collection in our library, but we have what you would typically find in an academic library. And then we also have a pretty extensive archive collection dating back to our opening as well. So I'm just going to talk about in my presentation the communication between myself and the faculty and staff at Midland, my role in textbook affordability, how I brought that conversation to our faculty and staff and what their feedback was. And then I'm going to show you a quick snapshot of the survey that I gave to students regarding textbook affordability and the idea of moving to OER, and then my next steps moving forward. So like my section of the case study emphasizes, when I first started at Midland 3 years ago in 2019, my biggest concern was building communication and trust between myself and the faculty and staff. There was a bit of a hiatus between me and the previous librarian, and the hiatus pretty much took up a whole academic year. So we were without a librarian for an academic year, which hurt. There wasn't a lot of communication with the library itself and the students. There wasn't a lot of instruction going on. So then faculty had to kind of back up and kind of think about how they're going to do their classes and their coursework because there wasn't somebody there to do that instruction. So when I first came on, my biggest goal was to meet with faculty and staff, build that trust and communication between myself and them. And I started with frequent meetings with faculty and deans and asking the questions, what is currently lacking at our library and the resources that we provide and what is currently happening that you maybe like or is working with your students and in your classes regarding our support to them, and then what do they want their students to focus on that we can help them with, and mainly also what I can help them with, and then resources, what resources could be improved. And with that question, that especially was having to do with textbook affordability, because I knew since Midland is a private institution, that usually means it's a more expensive institution to attend. So obviously textbook affordability was on the students' minds. And then I also, with communication, started a bi-weekly newsletter between myself and the campus community, both faculty, staff, and students, just keeping everyone up to date on library news and events, reiterating what I can do for the campus, what resources are available in my library instruction, tutorials, stuff like that. Just like I said, to get that foundation rebuilt between myself and the faculty, so I can get back into the classroom and have these conversations about what the library can provide to our community. And the big thing for me as well is collecting feedback, because like I always say, I may be a librarian, but I'm not an expert in, a specific faculty member's field. So if, they have a better idea for a textbook or resource or whatever it is, I want to hear from them or the students. And then again, too, what will make their library experience better and aid towards their academic success. And this also revolves around textbook affordability and accessibility, because I noticed in the 3 years that I was here that a lot of students were using our closed reserve, which is fine, but it doesn't always work because we don't have all the books available to the students. So a student will come up and ask for a book, and we just don't have it because we just don't have the budget to provide all the textbooks to the students. Or they'll utilize interlibrary loan for textbooks, which can also be a frustration, especially from the library that we're borrowing from, because, like every library, they have certain due dates. And if the student needs it for the full semester, but the due date is 3 weeks from the time we get the book, it just doesn't work. And a big thing as well is faculty, they're showing their frustration that their students aren't buying the books. But then on the other side of that, the students are frustrated because faculty are saying these texts are required, but are maybe only utilizing a chapter or two and not the full book. So then the students are like, why am I spending $150 on this book when we're only using a chapter or two? And then Midland is also a very adjunct heavy institution. So we have a lot of adjuncts that come in every semester, and a lot of the adjuncts that come in are either fairly new to the profession of teaching at an institution, or they may have, retired and just decided to come back and start teaching. And so they might not know a lot of places or the best books to adopt for their classes. And so some frustrations that happen is they're choosing these books that aren't, they may be on Amazon, but they're sold from a third-party seller. So, usually with third-party sellers, they raise the price to a ridiculous point, or they're just not a lot of copies out there, so students aren't able to get those books. So then that's where I come in and tell them, if you need assistance finding better, accessible, and affordable textbooks, I'm here to assist with that. So after I kind of laid the groundwork for that communication and trust built between myself and faculty, I decided to introduce open educational resources. This is a fairly new conversation on my campus. It's something that I've always been interested in because my schools that I attended utilized it. And so it's always been something important to me, especially, again, like I said, on a private campus that does have higher tuition. So when I decided to introduce OER, because I work in the library, they mainly, faculty say that the library is like our version of a student union because so many students come there. It's their main place to hang out, socialize, relax. So I hear the frustrations and concerns that students talk about regarding textbooks and their financial issues with it. So I started researching OER websites, resources, alternative textbook options such as textbook subscriptions. I compiled the real data on our typical freshman's first semester textbook costs at Midland, utilizing both our bookstore and other options like Chegg and Amazon, and put those numbers together. I found comparable OER textbooks on websites that could replace those freshman textbooks from our bookstores or Amazon. And then I also found some data from other schools, since we didn't have physical raw data yet. I found data from other schools about how textbook costs affected their grades, because if they were getting, older edition textbooks because they couldn't afford the current edition, how did that affect your grade? Because, not all the information is in, the same, goes across all editions. So how it affected their grades, their stress, having to drop the class because they just couldn't afford the book and they couldn't keep, being in class when they didn't have the book. And then by extension of all that, school retention. I researched other library OER LibGuides. They were extremely helpful, finding really good resources to utilize for these OER websites, and to provide more information and evidence on the positives of switching to OER. And then once I compiled all that, I sent a Zoom meeting to our faculty and staff, and I gave my presentation. I first presented to faculty in March of 2021. What resources have already been mentioned in this webinar. I mainly talked about Open Textbook Library, OpenStax, OER Commons, Merlot, Rutgers, Community Repository. And then I also talked about textbook like Perlego and Cengage Unlimited textbook subscriptions as an option. And then I also presented for the Library Commission as well about this topic. And the big thing about switching to OER, especially for our school, is since we have that one-to-one initiative, all the students have iPads, the ability to have the ebook or PDF or EPUB or whatever it is, getting that on their iPad, it's right at their fingertips. So it would just be ease of access, ease of use for our students. So after I presented on OER for the first time to our faculty, the feedback, mainly positive. The biggest concern, of course, was starting from scratch. A lot of our professors have been there for several years, and so they're utilizing, either the same book or a newer edition. So a lot of the information in their Canvas courses are, pretty much the same as semesters go. So their biggest concern was starting from scratch. I did emphasize that, in OpenStax, there is that option to have that Canvas cartridge downloaded into your course. So, it'll have example syllabus and modules and stuff like that. So that can be helpful with that. What was surprising is that there were a couple of faculty members that were already using OER, which was really exciting to find out. And some were completely unaware of it. The biggest thing that I got out of presenting to faculty members, our anatomy and physiology professor, who has probably the most expensive textbook on campus. It has to be, I think the last time I looked, like $250, $300. It's one of the most expensive ones. He actually moved to OER this upcoming fall. So I called that as a win after that presentation. So I was very excited about that and meeting with him and getting that into play. And then meeting with our health sciences, because again, that's going to be some of our most expensive textbooks, and how can OER work for them. And the nice thing about some of those OER resources, especially OER Commons, is it's not just textbooks, it's also simulations, interactive pieces. There's labs on there, or example labs on there. So it's not just the textbook portion that can help them. And then I also met with our College of Arts and Sciences just to determine, most of those professors were adopting books from Cengage. So maybe we can look at this school of arts and sciences as a whole and maybe move to a Cengage unlimited subscription for the students. So then at least we're saving some money somewhere for them. My next step was this spring, I sent out a textbook affordability survey to the students. I received 109 responses, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I don't know how your students or institutions work, but I know students don't always read their emails or respond to their emails. So I, again, thought 109 responses was a win. I Obviously, I knew this was going to happen, but I received very positive feedback on implementing OER. And I collected vital feedback regarding their current financial frustrations with textbooks and what they hope the faculty will do moving forward after I present the results of this survey to faculty. And this is just a snapshot. I made a one-sheeter that I sent out to faculty regarding the survey. So I didn't want to send out a really long email that probably nobody would read fully. So I made a one-sheeter quickly instead that highlighted the biggest feedback from the students. And the biggest thing here is over 29% of our students either use closed reserve, use their peers' copies, take photos of their peers' copies or from closed reserve, or find them for free online, which obviously can cause copyright issues. And then in many cases, they're getting the incorrect editions, which can also, affect their grades. 22% of our students spent over $500 on books for a semester, which is obviously very concerning and stressful for the student. And obviously 100% of our students were collectively in agreement that implementing OER versus what's going on now, whether it's an expensive textbook or books that faculty are requiring but not necessarily using, they all agreed that switching would be very helpful for them. Here's just some quotes from students regarding if they'd be more willing to utilize our textbook if it was free. Again, a lot of people are saying, yes, we want this. It's scary buying a $100 textbook, with the very small amount of money that I have in my bank account. One quote I thought was funny: I would read textbook for classes I'm not even taking if they were free. So yeah, most of these quotes that I got were very much pro OER and hoping that faculty will start moving in this into this option. So my next steps will be now surveying faculty and staff after they've seen the feedback from the students. I want to survey the faculty and staff. I'd like to know how their thoughts on choosing their textbooks and textbook availability. Again, since we are adjunct heavy, I would like to know their processes on choosing these and if they need any assistance, and for them to know that I can provide that assistance. And what makes them, what's the decision or what makes them choose a specific textbook that they're choosing. And if it's just because it looked good on Amazon, well, maybe we can find a better option for you that's more affordable to the students and more accessible. Their feedback on OER, like I said, I got mainly positive feedback with my presentation, but not all faculty members came to it. So I'd like to hear from more people what assistance is needed and their students and their textbook usage. I'd like to know, how do they feel about their students' usage on their books? Do they have ideas on better affordable options? Do they understand where their students are coming from when they're saying, this school is expensive, so I don't want to buy an expensive book? I would like to, present about OER annually to our faculty and staff and share the results from the survey that I want to do from our faculty. And then constantly reminding, that's a huge thing, is just that constant communication, reminding faculty and staff about OER and that I can help them find these resources and that these resources are out there for them. And then again, like I mentioned with adjuncts, just more visibility with them and showing them that I can help them and that these more affordable options are out there. And I didn't put this on my slide, but also maybe working closer with the bookstore that we have. We're only an online bookstore, so I don't work with them a lot, but maybe there's a partnership there where we can find some better options and more accessible options for our students. And that is my presentation. Thank you very much.
Hi, my turn, last but not least. I'm Angie from Marshall University Libraries in Huntington, West Virginia, and I'm the Collection and Resource Management Librarian. This is a picture of Drinko Library. It's our newest library, and we house our main collections in this building. The library in the background of this slide is Morrow Library. That was our original library. Just a brief overview of the university and when we were established back in 1837 as Marshall Academy, and then we became Marshall College. 1961, we became Marshall University. The Morrow Library in this photo was built in 1931. Still a very beautiful building. Drinko Library also houses the Study Center, the Writing Center, our IT department, and recently we just moved our government documents collection to Drinko Library, and the online learning department is also housed within Drinko Library. In the fall of 2021, this is the statistics I found on our information and research website. Our graduate headcount total 33,126, 8,017 undergraduate, for a total of 11,143 students. We have 520 full-time instructional faculty, plus our library faculty members and all of our adjuncts in addition. So we're talking today about OERs and textbook affordability. So where we began in this process started back in 2014. The West Virginia legislature, in response to some federal guidelines, also took it upon themselves to initiate legislation that required universities to provide affordable textbooks to their students, to make more of an effort to provide different means for textbooks. They had enough forethought to include electronic textbooks and online textbooks. In 2014, there really wasn't much availability at that time, but it really was forward thinking on their part. And it really made a difference in how we work now. Part of that legislation shed light on the need for a textbook affordability committee because everyone was all over the place with textbooks and how they wanted to do things. So the University Board of Governors formed a textbook affordability committee, and they developed lots of different ideas and programs that they brought to the Board of Governors. The Board of Governors in turn created the textbook loan program in conjunction with a partnership between university libraries and University College, which it was at the time more of a student success program. We now have a new Center for Student Success, and I'll talk more about that later. Our textbook loan program initially in 2014 began with university funds. They gave $15,000 to establish the program. That included marketing. It wasn't just textbooks. If students needed goggles for a lab and they couldn't afford them, we were able to purchase those type of items as well, as long as it went toward providing better access to their education and the resources that they needed to be successful. So the textbook loan program, with those $15,000 initial funds, we have a partnership with our bookstore, and I'm going to kind of change a little bit what I intended to talk about, because everyone has talked about the bookstore on campus and wanting to develop a partnership. Because of the West Virginia state mandate, the bookstores within universities within the state of West Virginia are required to work with the universities. They are a part of the Textbook Affordability Committee. so they have a seat there, and they know what's happening, and they're not left out in the dark. We use Follett for our bookstore, and part of that mandate for the bookstore is to provide the most affordable copy of the text that they can. So they have to sell a used textbook unless a student requests a new textbook, because the used is more affordable. When professors submit the text that they want to use for their class in the coming semester, they submit that to the bookstore. The bookstore compiles that list, and then they send me a copy of the entire list. So I have a copy of the class and what textbook they're using. If it's an open source textbook, it's right on the bookstore's list that no textbook is required. In addition to that, this past year, the West Virginia Higher Education Policy Commission added the framework to include within the affordable textbook definition. It originally was any textbook over $50. And with the new recommendations, it's any textbook. It doesn't have a limit on how much the textbook costs. So that opened a few doors for us on what we can add to our collection as well. So when the bookstore gives me the list, we go through, determine which courses are the most populated and are going to have the most need. And we purchase a copy, sometimes two copies, depending on how many students are in the course, a copy of the textbook from the bookstore for that class. Now, when a professor agrees to have their textbook included in the textbook loan program, they also agree to use their textbook more than 1 year. We prefer at least 2 years, and that's a part of the rules for our textbook loan program. So we're not constantly having to change the books and get rid of them after we've purchased them, because we can't spend $15,000 every year. The university doesn't have that kind of funding. We do get about $5,000 every year, and that helps us to continue the collection. We have, I think, 1,300 books in the collection right now, different textbooks, and we go through them, pull out what's not needed anymore, and the students can check out that textbook for 3 hours at a time. The book's not supposed to leave Drinko Library. They're housed in Drinko Library. They check them out just like they would any other book, except there's a limit on the time frame. And they're supposed to keep the book within Drinko Library. So if they don't have their textbook, they can come to the library, go to the study center, and do their homework, do their course readings, whatever they need to do. They can do that every day if they want to, assuming someone else doesn't already have the book checked out, obviously. So when COVID hit, it created a problem for everyone. So our textbook loan program really, it started out in 2014, 2015 academic year. We had 770 checkouts for textbooks, and that was awesome for the first year of the program. And you can see every year it continued to climb drastically. Each increment, each academic year, it's just a steady climb. And then we get to 1920 academic year, and it drops almost down to the second year program stats. That's when COVID hit. If you look at this amount of checkouts, we were still going to be in the same area, the same trajectory of increased checkouts within the program. But COVID hit in March, the entire university shut down. Everyone left. No one worked on campus unless they absolutely had to be there. Students were all sent home. They couldn't access the textbooks that we had on campus anymore. The next academic year, we only had freshmen on campus. Freshmen and anyone who had a lab that had to be done on campus, medical students, things like that. So we only had 12 checkouts that academic year because there was really not many students on campus. But in this past academic year, we only had 260 checkouts. Now that's a vast difference from what we experienced just 2 years ago or 2 academic years ago. So when we saw those statistics, we really had to kind of dig in and say, you know, what's going on? We're spending a lot of money. Why are there only 260 checkouts? Well, when we started digging in, you know, we looked at the statistics throughout the course of the textbook affordability program. We've saved our students almost $2 million. Average, according to the educationdata.org, the average textbook costs between $80 and $150 in 2022. So an average of $115. The number of checkouts we experienced, you know, we saved our students a lot of money. So why aren't the newer students using it, and why aren't continuing students use it that used it? They're maybe a senior now because of COVID and all the changes. So why isn't it being used? Well, when we go back to one of the areas that I highlighted in the West Virginia legislature's textbook affordability legislation for higher education, one of the areas that I highlighted earlier was the addition of emerging technologies such as electronic textbooks, online textbooks, print on demand. COVID just happened to bring new opportunities. We, as the library, were the driving force prior to COVID to get OERs more available to students. We had a lot of pushback from faculty that, you know, they are used to doing their textbooks the way they've always done them. And it was really difficult. You know, we didn't make a lot of progress with getting faculty to adopt OERs. They didn't trust them. You know, it's old material, you know, a lot of different reasons that they gave us why they didn't trust OERs. But COVID brought a brand new opportunity that without the pandemic, we would likely have never experienced, or maybe experienced 10 years from now, when the folks that were giving us all the pushback couldn't get textbooks for their students because they couldn't get the physical book. Students that weren't buying the book and were using the textbook loan program still didn't have the money to purchase the books because they're so expensive, as we've talked about throughout this entire session. The library, through our repository and our initial push for OERs, we had already begun a database within our repository for open educational resources. It's, you know, on our list of things that are available through Marshall Digital Scholar. And we use Digital Commons to work our Digital Scholar program. It's fantastic. We've been able to add so many new things. We have journals online that are open source. We have peer-reviewed journals that we publish that are all housed there. We have our open educational resources there. We have our thesis there. Everything that anyone would need for research that we can provide for free as a university is housed within Marshall Digital Scholar electronically. So when we came back from COVID, when everyone realized the importance of having and using online open resources, the pandemic created a huge need. The professors who were giving us all the pushback now were familiar with using online textbooks. They were familiar with using open source textbooks. They now feel more secure in the information within an open educational resource. So we didn't have the same attitude toward using this type of resource in the classroom. And it was amazing, the difference. So we partnered with the Open Education Network, and we offered faculty members a $250 stipend that was provided by the Academic Affairs Office. And we paid them $250 for reading and writing a review of a textbook within the Open Education Network. About the same time, the West Virginia Higher Education Policy Commission was also making a really big push for open educational resources. They were offering a $1,000 stipend for faculty members who adopted an open educational resource for their class. So all of the folks who were doing our $250 stipend were then eligible for this $1,000 stipend if they adopted the textbook within their class. So it was a win-win for anyone who had any kind of inkling that they may be interested in using this. We have provided tons of faculty training on using OERs. We have also done tons of faculty training on Creative Commons licenses, because now we have interest from faculty members wanting to publish their own textbook, open resource, and we house those in Marshall Digital Scholar. So it's all coming together right now. If I can say thanks to COVID, if that's possible, if there can ever be something that good that came from COVID, this is something good that came from COVID. Every day we get calls from faculty members. How do I do this? What do I need to do? What's available in my subject area? So they can start taking a look at new resources that they can use. We've also done lots of faculty training just individually on how to put the links in. We use Blackboard. How to put the links in Blackboard so they're not going against copyright by uploading a PDF of something that isn't open source. We've tons of new things that have come to light that people are asking for. So when we took a step back and looked at the savings that we were experiencing across campus for students from the beginning of our OER resource initiative up until now, students have saved over $526,000. And that's not nearly as much as they saved with the textbook loan program, but this is just getting started, and it's building initiative and building excitement, and more faculty members are jumping on the bandwagon. 32 new faculty members took advantage of the West Virginia initiative for the $1,000 stipend just last semester. That's huge in comparison to what we were experiencing prior to COVID. At a recent conference that the Higher Education Policy Commission held in the state of West Virginia for faculty members and administration for universities, they tallied up all the resources and savings for students across the state for schools who had adopted an OER course through their initiative. That it doesn't count anything that someone was already doing. This is just new things. More than 100 courses transferred to OER through this initiative with a savings of nearly $450,000 for 3,000 students. This really only started at the beginning of this calendar year. So for the state of West Virginia, those numbers are huge. And we're very, very excited to see things grow. And we're very excited to see what the future holds. A lot of folks have talked about working with publishers and how textbooks are so expensive for libraries to buy online for more than a 1 or 3 user license. And I'm kind of experiencing the opposite of that. Prior to COVID, I spent a lot of time working directly with publishers and telling them and explaining to them how textbooks are a hindrance to the students in West Virginia. You know, West Virginia is not a rich state. A lot of our students come from poverty. A lot of our students are first-generation students. And the very idea of purchasing a textbook that costs $200, sorry, too many zeros, $200 is outrageous. So it's really hard for them to, you know, decide, do I eat ramen noodles for a semester and buy all these textbooks, or do I find a way? So looking at the big picture, we are very, very pleased with how things are going, how all of our initiatives are moving together and working together. And we now have textbooks available in different areas around campus that students can borrow. This is in the new Center for Student Success. There's also grants that they can apply for if they're having trouble affording their textbooks. So it's just continuing to grow, and we're all very excited about it. And publishers are starting to get on board. They're making the effort because they are seeing the need since COVID happened. I really and there we go. We are Marshall, so we're going to overcome all the issues that we have experienced as a state and as our students, and working through COVID, and we're all coming through this stronger. And I think everything that everyone is doing across the country to make things more accessible is amazing. And I can't wait to see what the next 10 years holds.
Okay, great. Thanks so much to all of our presenters. I think we're ready to get to some attendee questions. We'll just start right up. I think I'm going to throw it back to Lily and John. We have a question here. The biggest question was about bookstore buy-in, which Angie talked about in her presentation too. But the main question was, how did you get bookstore buy-in into these projects? Didn't bookstores see this as a loss of revenue?
So they probably do see it as a loss of revenue. However, kind of like how Angie was describing with state statutes, Florida also has legislation in place for textbook affordability at universities and colleges. So I think this was used in a way to get OER and library source materials into the bookstore contract, actually. So the bookstore that we have is Barnes & Noble, and in their contract, it states that the bookstore will support affordability initiatives, including OER or library source materials. So that's kind of how we partner with that. And if you also think about it, the alternative, so either we have the library source ebook kind of adopted in the bookstore with that note on it, which gives students an option to purchase it if they want to, or the alternative is to have faculty say no textbooks required. And in that case, the bookstore wouldn't be selling it at all. So that's kind of how we talk about it with the bookstore. Either they put the library note on it and sell some, or the faculty say no textbook required and the bookstore doesn't sell any for that class.
Yeah. Lily, can I jump in kind of on a related question?
Sure.
About the bookstore, the textbook list. Another thing with the contract is the university does have access to the textbook list, so we can see what required materials are available. So that's how, both from an OER perspective and from a library perspective, how we know what course materials are being used.
Okay, great. Okay, I think there's a question here. I think this is for Hallie. The question is, how are you dealing with the recent trend of publishers to either not make textbooks available to libraries or to limit them to one user, one SU access?
I mean, that's the big question, right? Is what are our options? I wish I had a better answer, honestly. I think my answer so far is just trying to explain to faculty, this is what we have available. This is what we can offer. I do try to emphasize, I'm happy to help you look for an OER or an alternate edition or an alternate textbook. Some faculty are more receptive to that than others. But it's basically just trying to explain that, the publishers or the copyright holders get to set the rules for how their textbooks are sold and used. So if they don't want to sell them to libraries, then there's not much we can do about that. Like I said, I wish I had a better answer.
Got it. Okay, great. We have another question here. I think this is for Laura, which is, did you receive any pushback from faculty uncomfortable or downright hostile to switching to OER?
I mean, I don't think we've had any hostile or uncomfortable feedback. Like I said, it was mainly their hesitation was starting from scratch, and with a small university like we tend to have a lot on our plates and a lot of things we end up volunteering for or being put on our plates that we didn't necessarily ask for, but we do it because that's just, that's what we do. And so with things already a lot on people's plates, I understand obviously the hesitation of starting from scratch. And so that's why I told faculty, obviously I'm here for any assistance, but then, if you decide to adopt something from OpenStax, they do have that Canvas cartridge. So you're not, obviously you have to cater your tests, quizzes, or maybe a different assignment, but they have that initial guidance for you. And then what's also nice about OER Commons is they started this new thing. It's essentially a hub where if the same faculty member from another school adopted the same book you can communicate with that faculty member and see what they're doing in their syllabi or in their modules. So you can get that feedback from somebody else who's utilizing the same book as you. And somebody else shared this as well, but the other issue that I had with feedback was, they didn't trust the resources. I don't know who this is coming from or what this is coming from, so I don't want to adopt this. Which again, I understand because if you don't know a lot about OER and this is kind of your first time, kind of being introduced to it, and you've used a certain publisher or whatever for a long, extended amount of time, I understand that feedback. But that's where the meeting with faculty and teaching them and showing them and more experience with these products, and that it can be a source for you. And even if you don't want to adopt a full textbook, maybe look into, is there other options out there, like I mentioned, those textbook subscription programs or whatever it is, just to give the students a little bit more, ease on the financial part of it. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Great. Okay. Okay, we have another question. I think this was asked during Angie's presentation, so maybe you could kick it off, Angie. Andrew says, this has been a lot of great information about the savings passed on to students. Are OER leaders tracking the overall cost to the library to support a robust OER program? Not just resources, but staffing as well.
We do. It's actually a part, we have one specific person at the circulation desk who maintains the collection behind the circulation desk, and that's a part of her job. She has other duties as well, but we track the amount of time she spends on it, so we know, what it costs for her to do that part. I order the books. When I get that textbook list from the bookstore, I spend the better part of a day going through, the monster list, 900 some pages, to determine which textbooks to order. And, we base it off of different reports. So we do know how much time we spend, and we feel it's worth it for the students when we see the amount of savings the students are experiencing. And, I'm faculty, so I don't work on a time clock. I work every weekend and evening anyway. So, what's one more thing to add to my plate? It's really nothing extra to do once a semester. It's just a day out of the semester. So it really isn't a lot of time. Now, this year is going to be a lot easier because of new West Virginia mandate. Every class in our course list has to have an indicator if the textbook is free, if the textbook required for the course is open resource, if it is has to be purchased, and the cost of the textbook. So that's in the actual course list. So now all I'll have to do is pull a report of the students for each class and add that up instead of having to compare 12 other reports. It's all going to be in one report. So it'll be much more streamlined in the coming fall semester. So I'm really looking forward to that because it won't take as long. So as we grow, things continue to improve.
Got it. Okay. Okay, we have another question going back to Lily and John from Paige, who says, has the library's ebook acquisition budget increased to support these efforts?
The short answer is no, but what we do is we utilize funds kind of depending on the collection development funds that each subject librarian has. Some of them have more wiggle room than others. So some subject librarians may be able to purchase library sourced ebooks using their funds. However, some really don't have that space within their collection development funds, but our acquisitions team really does prioritize the textbooks. So for instance, with evidence-based acquisitions, every year or so when they decide which ebooks to keep on those lists, they do prioritize which ones are being used as textbooks. So we try to find the money where we can, but no, we don't actually have a designated fund for these, so it can be kind of difficult. We do continuously try to apply for grants, both internally and externally, to try to build that fund, but no luck so far.
Okay. Okay, a couple minutes left. It looks like a lot of these questions are about convincing faculty. So I don't know if we want to end on some tips on working. I know that's what the whole presentation is about, but some final thoughts on trying to connect with faculty on using OER and just open materials in general. Just throw it out to anyone.
I have something. I ran a survey for faculty last fall who selected no materials required. So I think that's trying to figure out what was brought up earlier in terms of what are you using. So I think really trying to gauge on campus what's being used and then what areas can be supportive, either survey or word of mouth or coffee, or whether if you want to push a survey out or if you want to have open office hours to try and bring faculty in. I think that's a great suggestion. Another thing that came up about bookstore contracts, in the state of Florida, our book list is considered a public record, so anyone can request it. A funny story, I actually walked into a used bookstore across from campus and they have the exact same tags that we do at our bookstore. And then I asked the manager, I said, so how do you get it? They said they do a public records request. So if you work at a public institution, check your laws, and if you're having trouble getting access to that textbook list, that may be the ultimate option at your institution.
Any other thoughts from anyone before we close out? Okay, that's fine. So thanks so much to Lily, John, Hallie, Laura, and Angie for taking the time to speak with us today. And thank you to our attendees for your questions and comments. I'd like to remind our viewers that we did record today's program, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from Choice and ACRL with a link to the recording. Also, if you would like to download the presenters' case studies, I'll just throw that link in the chat again to access that. Also, if you have a few minutes after the presentation to fill out a brief survey, we'd really appreciate it. Your responses help improve our presentations. So thanks again to all of you out there for joining us. We hope you learned something new from the session, and we hope to see you again in the near future on another webinar.